Hi guys, in this video we're looking at a mock test from Chilwell Driving Test Centre. Because we're not allowed to use the test centre car park during the day, I'm starting up on a side road just around the corner from the test centre. Up ahead you'll see the roundabout and the traffic lights just the other side of the roundabout, and just the other side of those traffic lights is the test centre. So as we move away from the roadside, just remember checking your blind spot, make sure you're safe before you do so. If you're missing those blind spots, it's going to pick you up faults, so be very, very mindful of that. And coming up to the roundabout, we're going to be going straight ahead. These white arrows around the roundabout, you should not touch them at all. There's a lower curb there that you want to stay off of, so the pupil does a really nice job coming around there. A little bit on the slow side, but it's not to the point I'm worried about that. Notice the markings as well up ahead for the traffic lights. As you can see, we're lining up on the right hand side to turn right onto the main road. So the test centre would have you coming out from the other side of these lights, turning left instead. Now, as you're coming up to these lights, just be mindful of the filter arrow on the left there. So the white car on the left can actually go and we can't. So you don't want to get distracted by them and sort of follow suit thinking that you've done something wrong. We are definitely on a red light. They've got a filter arrow to allow them to go. When you're turning right here, of course, with no right filter arrow, you'd have to be mindful of oncoming cars and give way to them first. And as you come into the new road, just remember the default position is the left-hand lane. The pupil's done a nice job of tucking himself into that left-hand lane, and that's where we want to be unless we're overtaking or turning right further along. If you are going to be turning right, the examiner will give you plenty of notice to move over to that right-hand lane before making the turn. And you'll notice again, this set of traffic lights has filter arrows for the right turn. Now, as the pupil joins the queue of traffic here, my opinion here is a little bit too far back from the car in front. We could definitely fit a car in between, and I think that could be tempting to some vehicles to maybe sneak into that gap. Because nothing comes of it, I'm only going to record a driver fault, but don't leave too much space behind cars when you are queuing up like this. We want to be close enough that it's not going to invite people into that gap, but far enough that we could move around that car if we needed to, for example, if it breaks down, because if you're too close in that situation, you're going to have to either reverse the car or get out and push the other car out of the way. Notice the arrows here telling cars on the right to merge into our lanes, so we want to be covering that right mirror here before those lanes merge. So if anyone's overtaking us, you can spot them nice and early, and you can adapt your speed and either let them in or close the gap on them, depending which is safest. Remember, it's got to be a safe decision. If you're trying to close the gap on them and they're flying up, then it's going to put you at high risk. So that sort of situation you'd hold back with. Up at the traffic lights that are coming up, we're going to be taking a right turn. Just be mindful of vehicles parked like these vans. You want to be making sure you're leaving about the width of a door, so if a door does open, you're not going to take the doors off straight away. Coming up to these lights, you can see the arrows guiding you into that right-hand lane. Now, I'd like to see the mirrors and signal done before you enter that filter lane. And then, of course, another set of filter lights on these traffic lights too. So you can see the traffic going straight ahead can carry on while we have to wait for our own separate light. When we get that green arrow saying we can go right, that allows us to cross without having to worry about the oncoming cars. You'll see they're all stopped on the other side. Don't worry about the cars from the right too much because they'll be on a left filter, just like we were at the start of this video, and the cars turning right, as you can see, are waiting for us to clear and their lights to change first. As we enter the new road, of course, don't forget to check your mirrors, just keep updated on who's behind, and then keep your mind up and ahead, scanning around for clues as to what could affect your own speed and path, such as the van waiting to pull out there. They could have decided to take that opportunity in front of us. And if they did, you want to be prepared for that so you're not caught off guard, because that's going to get the adrenaline flow and make you feel more nervous. So lots and lots of awareness of what's going on ahead and just awareness of potential risks as you're going along. We don't want to be scared of them, remember, we just want to be aware of them. Another few parked cars on the left, and again, we want to be very mindful to leave a door's width where we can. If you can't leave that much space, you want to be going really slowly. Now, I felt that this learner was a bit too close to that first car, still leaning out as he came right up to the front corner of it, which is why I'm going to put a driver fault there. In that situation, you need to get the car nice and straight before you go through the gap, rather than angling out towards the oncoming cars. But ultimately, if you're really not sure about that gap, wait for the oncoming cars to go rather than trying to squeeze yourself through and follow the cars ahead. If there is enough room, just keep the car nice and straight, and remember, slow and steady where there's less space to do so. Up ahead, you can see the traffic starting to slow down. As soon as you see those brake lights or the change up ahead, get on those mirrors and get off the gas. And that's going to give you more thinking time and more awareness of what's going on around you. And that makes for a smoother, controlled approach up to that queue. If you're coming up and reacting very late to those things, it's going to make the braking very heavy. And once again, it's going to really increase that adrenaline and that nervousness on your test. And you want to be as relaxed as you can. Moving off again, don't forget the mirror checks, of course, because something might come up behind you, such as a bike or a motorbike. And if you can, keep those keep clear boxes clear. The instruction is there in black and white. Do not sit in those keep clear boxes if you can avoid it. Now, this pupil's got his front end just inside the keep clear zone, but there's enough room between him and that post that a car turning into the road could do so safely, just about. A big vehicle would struggle, so if anything came along, that could escalate into a fault on your test. Because nothing comes of it, I'm not going to record a fault on this occasion, but an examiner may put a driver fault for the potential. As you make your way through the traffic lights, don't forget to have a little scan around for anything that might affect your path, such as blue light vehicles or pedestrians crossing, or even vehicles coming through, such as blue light vehicles, or just people who aren't paying attention to those lights. If you know what's going on around you, you're more likely to keep yourself safe. And that good awareness of what's going on around you is going to go well on your test. It's going to go in your favor, because if you've got good awareness, it means the examiners are going to be more comfortable with what you're doing, because they can see that you're looking around, you're engaged in what's going on. You're not just fixated on the car ahead and reacting to what's going on in front of you. You're actually scanning around and thinking about what's going on and planning for the potential risks. This section of road is a common place for examiners to ask you to pull over to do a hill start. Just be mindful of that. It is safe to pull over as long as you're not too close to the junctions. Just make sure you give people plenty of time if you get asked to pull over there as well. Notice the van on the left there. As you approach anything like this, remember the mirror checks and giving that van a door's width of space if you can. If you can't give them that space, you go through slower. And if you're really not sure, remember you can always wait for the road to be clear. Don't feel pressured that you have to move through that gap if you don't feel it's appropriate to move through that gap. The flip side of that is, if it's reasonable to get through, then stopping is going to be unnecessary and may be recorded as hesitation on your driving test. Up ahead, we're approaching Bardill's Island, where we'll be going left towards Derby. Now, the left-hand lane is, of course, where we want to be to turn left. The right-hand lane is the one you'll need for any other destination. So left-hand lane is Derby only as you come up to the roundabout. And the signs just before Toton Tram Stop, they'll tell you which lane to use for your destination. So Derby on the left. If you're going to Nottingham or you're going to Stapleford, you'll need that right-hand lane where the Renault on our right is. Notice he's moving in to turn left. Do be mindful not to signal too soon if you are going to signal, because of this road on the left. So if you are going to signal, pass that road and then put your signals on. However, because we're in a left-only lane and it isolates us from any other direction, the left signal is not really necessary for this turn. You'll notice nobody else is signaling on this one. As we come round, be mindful of that crossing. If there's anyone waiting to cross, of course, those lights could change. And then just after that, you've got your national speed limit signs. So you want to be building your speed up to a safe speed up to 70 miles an hour. Now, I've put a signal timing fault here because when my pupil did this left turn, As he straightened the wheel, the signal did not come off and he's left it on. So I've had to prompt him to turn that signal off. If you're prompted to turn your signals off, the examiners will put it down as a serious fault. If that signal causes another driver to react in a way that poses a risk, then that could escalate to a dangerous fault as well. So when you make those turns, if your signal doesn't automatically cancel, make sure you catch it before it becomes a problem to anyone else. We're going to be taking the next exit. We've just passed the sign for that, bearing left towards the M1 junction 25 roundabout. Now this roundabout seems to catch a lot of people out, particularly the direction that this pupil is going to be going, which is right 4th exit towards Sandyacre. As you're approaching the exit, what we'll be looking for is the countdown signs, the 3, 2, 1 markers. When you reach those markers, you want to be checking your mirrors, signaling, but not slowing down. You want to keep that speed up. Now you notice my pupil is going a little bit slow here, sitting at 40. I'd like him to be moving a bit quicker. And that's why I'm going to put a driver fault there for appropriate speed. So we should still be doing a good 50, 60 mile an hour here, even in these conditions. Then we cross the lines and then slow down, ready for those traffic lights and the roundabout down the bottom of the ramp. Now remember, we're going Sandyacre, so as we approach this, you'll see Sandyacre is right 4th exit, so we need to be in the right-hand lane. Now, the reason I've recorded a signal fault there is because the pupil has started moving back into that right-hand lane before he's signaled. You've got to do your mirrors, signal, then check how people react, and then move over. Now, coming into the roundabout, the pupil realizes he's carrying a bit too much speed, so he slows down quite well as he comes into the curve. Notice how he's keeping on the right-hand lane, ready for that 4th exit. See the sign in the middle lane there says Sandyacre, so he's mirror checking and he's positioning in the middle lane. There's no need to signal because you're not changing lane, you're just drifting out with your lane. And as we come around the corner, that's going to lead us into lane 1 under the bridge. The pupil is a little bit off with his steering there. He overcorrects himself, so I'm going to record a steering fault. As we leave the roundabout, don't forget mirrors and signal before you take this exit. And then looking up, you'll see the speed change as well, 30 mile an hour. So you want to be very, very conscious of those speed changes. They normally happen as you enter or as you leave a junction. So if you're not looking around for those, you're going to miss them and you're not going to know what the limit is when you go into that new road. If you do miss them, there'll normally be clues to look out for as well. So coming down this road, you can see it's built up. There's housing, there's street lights, and there's no reminder signs as you go along as well. If it's anything other than 30, you will see reminders. See the warning for the traffic lights there? We're going to be taking a left turn at these traffic lights. The pupil's nicely positioned on the left side, mirrors and signal as he comes up to it, bringing the car all the way up to that stop line. Ideally, we don't want to be positioned over the stop line like the other learner is here. That may pick you up a fault, but I think that learner's made a good choice not to carry on through the junction when the lights have changed. So this is a better position than it would be to try and go from that position when the lights are changing, because he's too far back to clear the junction. Just be mindful of that when you're at traffic lights. Don't panic and try and rush your way out the junction. But ideally, if you're not the first or second car in the junction, don't cross the stop line either, because you can almost guarantee he was third in line there, and that's what's caused him to be in that position. Coming around the corner here, as we look up and ahead, you'll see the 40 mile an hour sign. So you want to be on those mirrors, just seeing if anyone's following you or trying to overtake you, picking up your speed nice and safely. Now there is a bike lane on the left here. It's got broken lines, which means you can drive in it if you reasonably need to. Because we don't need to, what I don't want to see is the pupil driving along like this. So I'm going to record a fault for normal driving position because he's in that bike lane unnecessarily. I'm going to get him to pull over on the left in a moment as well. Now the examiners will ask you to pull over about 4 times on your driving test. All that the examiners want to see is that you can pick a safe place to pull over, you're checking your mirrors, you're signalling, and you're allowing cars behind plenty of time to go round you if there are cars behind you. And then when you move off, they want to see that you're picking a safe opportunity, you're checking your blind spot, and then you're moving out safely. Now I'm recording a serious fault for timing with signals here because as the pupil moves off, he leaves his left signal on, And that unfortunately is very misleading for people approaching him. So this has to go down as a serious fault, particularly as he passes the road on the left there, because he does not turn it off himself, and I've had to remind him to turn that signal off. Had he corrected it himself, it might well have only gone down as a driver fault. But because I've had to say it, just like the one on the roundabout Bardell's Island, it's got to go as a serious fault, unfortunately. So whilst on your test you'd only pick up one serious fault for doing that twice, I'm going to record it twice just so you can see what these faults could be. Now, travelling down this road, the pupil sits at around 30 mile an hour for a lot of it, even though it's a 40 mile an hour zone. I'm not going to mark anything for that because we've got a car ahead. He's keeping a really good following distance on. We've got the very, very wet road surface and the rain on the windscreen, of course. So a lowered speed is perfectly reasonable. Taking this left turn here, it's a very, very tight corner. Notice the building on the right as we're coming in the trail on the left. They make it very narrow. So the low speed coming in there is really helpful in terms of keeping the car in a good position. So really good example of how to take that corner there. You want to get the speed right down before you enter it. And then coming along this road here, even though it's a 40 mile an hour zone, there's a lot of this road I wouldn't do 40 down, maybe even 25 or less on some sections of it, particularly where some of the bends are. So remember, those limits, they're not a target that you have to achieve. What the examiners want to see is a safe speed based on the conditions of the road, not just the limits. As we come around some of these bends, you'll see they are quite narrow. The visibility is quite poor, so we want to keep tucked into our side of the road, nice and close to that verge on the left. Use that left mirror to help you judge that space. As the vehicles pass, check the right mirror, come back away from the verge and pick up your speed again. So if you watch how the learner handles this road, you'll see most of it's pretty good. The positioning's pretty reasonable. He's keeping nice and close to the left side on these bends and slowing down whenever his view's restricted or when anything comes the other way. So a really good example of how to handle this road. As we come down into more built up roads, you can see that speed limit drops down to 30. We've got a number of parked cars on the right, so the pupil's speed has to match what he can see here, using those mirrors as well, just to ensure he's got safe space around him. So notice the cycle lane on the left there. Want to be keeping out of that, of course. When there's parked cars, covering that right mirror before you move out around it, and the left mirror as you pass in by two. And if anything comes from the other direction, be ready to tuck in and let it go. I'm going to get my pupil to pull up on the left here behind the red parked car. Now, he's a little bit early in slowing down. I think the instruction was misunderstood, but when the examiners ask you to pull up behind a parked car, they want you fairly close to it, about a car length away. So I've just had to encourage my pupil to move himself up a little bit more for this one before we can do our angle start. Now, the idea of the angle start is to demonstrate that you can move around that parked car safely, and this requires that you check in your blind spot and you're very aware of oncoming vehicles. Now, the pupil was a little late in spotting the oncoming car here, so we had to brake a little bit firmly to avoid being a problem to them. That is exactly what you don't want to get caught out by. Now, because the pupil did react in time and there was still plenty of space for that oncoming car to go, I'm only going to put a driver fault because we was a little bit late spotting it. If it had gone any further, or if I had to intervene, then that would have escalated into a serious or dangerous fault on that occasion. So be very mindful of oncoming vehicles when you're pulling out on your angle start. Around this little back street here, some of these bends are really tight. You can see the pupil is really slow as we're going through here. I would say this is a little bit too slow. However, there's nothing behind, there's no disruption caused, and he does start to pick up the pace as he can see a little bit more around those bends. Now, if that causes any disruption to vehicles behind, then it can go down as a serious fault. Just be mindful to make safe progress around these roads. The sat nav here tells me this is a left turn. Just be mindful as well, the markings tell us that's a bend, not a left turn, so you don't need to signal for it or give way to anyone. You just keep yourself moving around nice and tight to the left. And just up ahead, I'm going to get my pupil to pull up on the right hand side of the road and do his right reverse maneuver. So the idea of this is we pull up on the right hand side, and then you're going to reverse 2 car lengths, keeping close to the curb. What the examiners want to see is good control with the steering, so the car's not swaying out into the middle of the road or going into the curb, and that you're looking around plenty, looking over both your shoulders and using those mirrors effectively too, and that you keep the car really slow while you're doing this maneuver. If you're doing it too quickly, or you start swaying out into the road or up the curb, or you're not looking around enough, the examiners may record faults for that. So keep your eyes moving, keep the car slow, and then the examiner will tell you when to stop. Now, I'm going to record a fault there for moving off under control, and this is because the pupil left the car in reverse before moving away. Be very careful to make sure you select drive if you're in an auto, or first if you're in a manual, and then checking that left blind spot before you pull away. And that's because, of course, the left-hand side is where the danger is, where the road is, and that's who you'd be looking out for, cars coming up behind you. End of the road, we're taking a right turn. You can see from the walls on this junction, it is a very blind junction to come up to, so the pupil's coming up really slowly to allow plenty of time to see what's going on. That's especially true with the black Peugeot on the other side there, because we have to pull out into the oncoming lane. So you've got to make sure that you're looking effectively before you cross that giveaway line, making sure both directions are clear for you. And just to highlight the importance of this one, the most common reason that people fail the driving test is not making effective observations at junctions. So you've got to make sure that you're looking effectively before you enter a new road. A little bit close to the red car as we pass that one, so I'm going to put another driver fault there. The pupil could have moved out a little bit more for that one and give that door's width that I've mentioned before. A left turn as well at the end. Again, just making effective checks before you cross that giveaway line. Not forgetting your mirrors and signal on approach, of course, but remember, it is critical that you give way. It's a legal requirement, so the examiners want to see that you can see it safe before you cross that line. If you commit too early and you're coming up to that junction too quickly, and that means you can't make effective observations, then you are going to get faulted. And remember, that is the most common reason for people failing the driving test, and it has been for the past few years. So it's something you don't want to get caught out by. Make sure you can see it safe before you cross that giveaway line into the new road. Just up ahead, you'll see the 40-mile-an-hour signs hiding in the trees there. Be very careful of signs that are hidden away. If you're looking around frequently, scanning around, then you are more likely to pick them up than if you're just staring at the road ahead. So keep your eyes moving whilst you're driving along. Notice the direction sign on the left here is telling us to use the right-hand lane to carry on straight at this roundabout. So if you spot that late, you've got your markings as well. Now you notice the pupil is going for the left lane initially and then changes. As long as you check your mirrors and signal if there's anyone nearby, then that won't be a problem. Now, unlike earlier, it was nice and clear and the pupil did look at his mirrors first, so I'm not going to record a fault for that. Entering this roundabout, you want to make sure you're keeping to the right-hand side as you go in, ready to leave on the other side with a left mirror and left signal check. Remember, the priority is traffic from the right and anyone coming round the top of the roundabout. So if you're not sure that you can cross safely, you want to be on the cautious side, but look for those opportunities. Don't get too focused on the traffic itself. Look for the gaps that you can cross in, and that's going to help you get across more confidently and more safely. Now you're still in a 40 zone as you come down this road, but just up ahead you'll see that drops down to 30 mile an hour. Again, you've got to be scanning around for those signs, because if you miss those speed changes, you're potentially going to end up traveling at the wrong speed, and that could end up giving you faults on your test and even costing you your test. So keep your eyes moving throughout the whole test. Keep scanning around for any signs, any information that helps you know what to do up ahead. See the lorry up ahead? Remember to check your right mirrors before you move out around that lorry, your left mirrors as you're passing by, and give that door's width. And if you can't give the door's width, slow down to give yourself more thinking time. Now, stopping behind this Kia, the pupil is still a little bit further away than I think is ideal, but it's not to the point that it was earlier where it's excessive and it could invite someone around. And because it's so brief as well, I'm not going to record any faults for this because there's not really an opportunity for anyone to squeeze into that gap. If you leave too big a gap, like the pupil did at the start of this test, then it could pick you up a fault. But equally, we don't want to get too close. You want to be able to see the road between you and that car in order that you can see any markings that are there too. Notice the pupil hanging back here to keep the junction clear. Just be careful this doesn't escalate into hesitation. If you hold back and let people go deliberately, then that is absolutely fine. But as soon as you get an opportunity to cross, like this pupil does, he's allowed all those cars to come out, but he's moving over fairly confidently, and that's pretty reasonable. I don't see any reason to fault him for that. It was very intentional. He's using his mirrors to see what's going on behind him too, and he's just allowing them cars to go to clear the junction up. And it's just important to remember that when you do things like that, it's got to be intentional. If you hold back and it's hesitation and you're reacting to the presence of the other cars there, then that is not going to go in your favor. But where it's an intentional decision and the examiners can see that it's intentional, then it shouldn't pick you up any faults as long as it's a reasonable decision. So in that case, the pupil was very intentional, and it was reasonable in that if he would have moved up, he would have obstructed someone unnecessarily, and he would have to actively move up and obstruct them, whereas just hanging back to let them go and then moving on when there's space, it's not unreasonable to let those cars out, because otherwise they're just going to be sitting in the queue, which is building up behind us at this point anyway. Now, it can get quite busy coming down here through Long Eaton, so you want to be watching your mirrors frequently. Just make a note of that bike lane on the left. The markings are quite faded at points, but there is still a bike lane there, so we've got to keep an eye on any cyclists catching up with us while we're queuing, because if we move off while someone's coming around us, that could cause a problem. It's just a case of keeping an eye on them, making sure when you get to points like this where the bike lane sort of disappears into our lane, the examiners just want to see that you're aware of the cyclists and the potential for them to be merging into your position, and that you're accounting for them if they are there. If you're not looking and there is a cyclist there, then you're potentially going to end up causing them a problem, and the last thing you want to do is end up getting a cyclist caught up under your back wheels. So watch those mirrors frequently, and that's going to keep you safe, the cyclist safe, and the examiner happy. And it's going to make you happy because that's going to lead you into passing your test, being a safe driver afterwards. Because remember, it's not just about passing your test, it's about looking after yourself after you've passed. Up ahead, we've got two roundabouts. We're going straight ahead at both of them. Now, the examiners will normally tell you here to use the left lane because you'll need the left lane at the second roundabout. Now, this is because the right-hand lane at the second roundabout only goes right. Now, because that's the normal position, and I've told the pupil we're going straight ahead, I'm going to give him a fault for his normal positioning because he enters in the right-hand lane and then changes as he's coming up to the roundabout. When he changes, he does check his mirrors and he does signal, but it put him in a position which could have been quite awkward, particularly with vehicles coming up the left-hand lane. The other thing that causes him a problem on this roundabout is when he changes lane, he forgets to cancel that signal. As a result, if you watch the red car waiting to come out from the first exit, you'll see they start pulling out in front of him because they think he's going to turn left. Because of that response, it's got to go down as a dangerous fault. And of course, any dangerous fault is going to result in a fail on your driving test. So if you do change lanes on the way up to a junction, make sure you sort the signals out so they match what you're doing on the junction. And that way, you'll avoid misleading anyone else into thinking you're going a different direction. Now, approaching the next roundabout, we can see the cars coming from the right. It's pretty obvious that we're not going to be able to go. The pupil is a little bit late to respond there. You can see the nose of the car jolt back up as he brakes quite firmly at the end. Be very, very mindful to scan around on the approach to a roundabout, because if you can spot an opportunity early or you can spot a hazard early, then you can make the response to that nice and smooth, and that's going to keep you happy. It's going to keep the examiner happy and comfortable. If you're braking hard as a late reaction like that, it's going to pick you up faults. So make sure you're looking around early, planning early, making those approaches as smooth as you can. Notice on this bike lane, we've got a solid white line. Now that is what's known as a mandatory bike lane. You must not drive or park in that bike lane. Where the lines are broken, you are allowed to drive and park in it if you need to or if it's reasonable to, but these ones, it's only if it's absolutely necessary. So earlier on, when the pupil drove through a bike lane that had broken lines, I gave him a driver fault. If he did that on this bike lane, I would be inclined to give him a serious fault there for his response to road markings. There's a nice response from the pupil there regarding the van who stuck his nose out and started to cross before we had actually cleared the junction. I'm not too bothered by what the van did. There was plenty of time to react and the pupil could respond nice and smoothly. It's just waiting for that response from the pupil, of course. If you fail to respond appropriately to someone doing that, that's going to pick you up faults. So sometimes people will blame other vehicles for pulling out on them or cutting them up, but actually what gets you the fault is not them, it's your reaction to that vehicle. So driving up to that van without responding to the fact he's pulled out, that would pick you up a serious fault. Whereas because the pupil just slowed down and let him out of the way, and because that's the best response that he could have done there, it's not going to pick him up a fault. So remember, when other people cause you a problem on the road, the examiners aren't looking at what they've done, they're looking at how you respond to it. And this is why it's so important to keep your eyes moving, keep your mirrors covered, and just keep yourself aware of what's going on around you at all times. Notice the markings on this set of lights, how we need the right-hand lane to go straight ahead. So the pupils lined up really nicely there. Now, if you check in your mirrors nice and early before you take up that position, you'll be able to plan for any cars that are going to try to take that position off of you. If you lean into the left too far, you're increasing the chance then of people coming around you as well. So you want to make sure you're leaning towards that center line nice and early to secure that position. Mirror use, again, really essential there, because if you lean out to that position without looking in your mirrors, you're potentially going to be leaning into the path of something, maybe a motorbike overtaking, and that of course puts you and that bike at risk. So we want to be on those mirrors nice and early whenever we're approaching any junctions. At the next set of traffic lights, my sat nav tells the pupil to keep right. However, that instruction is not correct. We're just continuing straight. Now, you can use either lane to do that. Typically, because you're going straight ahead and it's quite away for the next turn, the left lane will be absolutely fine. But it seems that the sat nav has the filter lane confused and tells you to stay out of the filter lane. If the sat nav does give you any information that's misleading like this, then the examiner should intervene and tell you, do not follow the sat nav, just go straight ahead. And then you rely on the road markings or signs to guide you into that next junction. Again, with the red traffic light, you can see the pupil slowing down nice and early to join the queue. This is a much better gap behind the car in front. There's enough room that we could get round him if we needed to, if that car broke down, for example, or if they rolled back, there's enough room for them to catch the car before it causes us a problem. And he's not so far back that it tempts the cars in the other lane to cut into that space. So this is absolutely spot on in my opinion. Now remember, when you're sat at traffic lights like this, particularly for a long time, it's really easy to zone out or to fixate And you want to make sure that you're not fixating on the traffic lights or the car in front, that you're keeping your eyes moving, keeping yourself engaged in what's going on around you. If you're aware of what's going on around you, then when the lights change, you can plan more effectively. And that includes your mirror use, looking out for anyone who intends to change lane or anyone filtering up between on a motorbike or cycle. If you spot them early, you can plan for them early. So really good awareness again is essential when you're on your test. Now that's going to bring us up past the driving test centre, where at the next traffic light you'd be turning right to go back into Chilwell Test Centre. So you'd be on the mirrors, signalling and moving over nice and early, ready for that right hand turn. Now I'm going to get my pupil to pull off down one of the side roads where we can debrief for our mock test. You can see he's got 11 driver faults. We've then got 2 serious faults and a dangerous fault for his use of signals by leaving them on after junctions and by misleading other traffic. So be very mindful of how your signals are interpreted by other drivers. Make sure that you are telling people exactly what you intend to do, and that's going to help keep you safe and on track to pass your driving test. I hope you found this video useful in preparing for your own driving test. If you have, please do like, share, subscribe and comment, and I'll try and keep these videos coming. Thank you again for watching, and God bless you.